In 2001, the 1968 science fiction film directed by Stanley Kubrick, protagonist Dave Bowman travels through an abstract vortex of colorful imagery before finding himself inside of a white room, where time itself appears to break as he experiences different stages of life seemingly over the course of minutes. In 2001, the real-life year, Sweet Half-Life, a mod for Half-Life 1 with, until its final moments, seemingly no relation whatsoever to Kubrick's film, nevertheless meticulously recreates that same surreal ending sequence as part of an alternate, true ending. An ending accessible only by boarding a flying saucer parked in the hangar of the Black Mesa Research Facility, flying it to an alien mothership full of little gray men, and launching a gargantua into their death laser pointed at planet Earth. This sequence solidified my desire to share this mod with you, but it's not what caught my interest in the first place. A couple of years ago, I was looking for mods to cover for what would become my Half-Life mods video, when, amongst the screenshots for Sweet Half-Life, I found this image. A blonde girl with cross-shaped earrings, dressed in the iconic orange hazardous environment suit, drawn in a late 90s, early 2000s anime art style. This image had me in a stranglehold. Plopping an anime girl into Half-Life, of all things, seemed like such an odd choice, but simultaneously just felt correct. I knew I had to play Sweet Half-Life, but who exactly was KS? Koumei Satou, or KS as he typically goes by, created a series of maps and mods for FPS games from 1998 up until 2011, all of which embrace an unlikely fusion of surreal art, architecture, film, music, and, of course, anime girls. I want to share with you these works that haven't left my brain for the last 2 years, and to do that, as often seems to be the case on this channel, we need to start with Quake. The first Quake has been around for almost 30 years at this point, but I only got around to playing it when Night Dive released their remastered version in August 2021. I think my first FPS was technically Nightmare 3D, but the first real FPS I ever played was actually Quake 2, gifted to me by a kid at school in the form of a burned and sharpied CD-ROM. I loved Quake 2, but the drawback of this love was that it inflicted upon me this persistent perception that Quake 1 was too crusty and too old to bother with, despite only releasing a couple years prior. I mention all of this simply to say, finally playing Quake 1 just a few years ago was legitimately mind-blowing. If I'm honest, I didn't tremendously love the original campaign, but it was enough of a baseline to push me into trying out and properly appreciating some of the more modern, official, and community-crafted experiences. It'd be hard for me not to call the first Quake my favorite FPS ever at this point. So while I may have only played a tiny fraction of the nearly 30 years worth of custom maps for Quake, I still feel confident in saying that there's something special about weird comic art. Created by KS in 1998, just 2 years after Quake's release, WCA is a relatively short and simple map at a glance. The combat sequences won't test your reflexes even half as much as the base campaign, and the machinery operating and key searching is likewise mercifully simple. A pretty breezy time, all things considered. What makes WCA special for me is its visual design. The map nearly exclusively utilizes the default texture set included with the game, but the design sensibilities make it feel completely distinct. There's a surreal and dreamlike element to all of KS's stuff, and it's present even back here in 1998. The machineries housing the buttons you need to interact with are, well, houses. Foregoing the usual cathedral stylings of Quake, there are actual regular 4-pane windows here, hosting view to an almost pleasant, cloud-filled void. There's also a lot of stuff here that's just plain old cute. If you happen to turn around and face the door you entered the map from, you might notice someone looking back at you. In the cellar, a machine turns zombies into blood juice, and a brewmaster chastises you for damaging the equipment. This act of vandalism has the side effect of granting us access to the gallery, a room displaying illustrations by KS, and almost certainly the area that this map is known for. This isn't the first Quake map to do something like this. Museum, a map from 1996, also allows the player to observe and appreciate some artwork by the map's author, Steve Resko. Resko is known for his work on various id Software games, having made a pretty wild Doom mod called Skywood, multiple Quake maps, and eventually going on to work for the company as a level designer for Doom 3. But even the silliest paintings here still feel pretty Quake-ish, and they certainly don't come anywhere near the jarring juxtaposition of cute anime girls plastered onto the purple eldritch walls of WCA. I can't imagine what it would have been like for someone to fire up their PC in 1998 with Netscape Navigator pointed to Planet Quake or whatever, seeing just this screenshot and then walking into this gallery. This commitment to contrast is a huge part of what I find so appealing about this map and KS's works in general. KS has a blog where, in recent years, he's shared renders of scenes he's crafted in Unreal Engine 4, depicting Hatsune Miku hanging out around urban, sometimes surreal architecture as part of a series he calls Architecture Plus Girl. I love these photos. There's just something about placing this kind of character into this kind of environment that I find so appealing, and maybe there's some more artistically informed words to use to explain why, but I think Architecture Plus Girl sums up this aesthetic perfectly. I've had a lot of fun trying to recreate this style myself, so much so that I've decided to incorporate it throughout the video, just for a little visual flair. But to avoid any confusion, none of these maps or mods actually include any of these 3D models, with one exception, though we'll get to her later. Despite these characters being depicted in 2D illustrations, I absolutely think they fit within this concept, and it's so cool to see this idea taking shape over the course of 20 years. At the end of the hall is a sort of mascot character for KS's maps and mods called Drop, who kindly gives way for us to enter into a small, black void room with a window that opens to display a sort of street lamp-like object. After some switch flipping and machinery whirring, we retrieve the gold key and head back to the entrance area, where we can now activate the strange mechanism at its center. The way this plays out is just so cool and creative, with this perfect rectangle of sky, a literal skybox, that floats away, allowing us passage into a portal beneath. We emerge into a dark room, lit only by a street lamp, perhaps the same one we saw in silhouette earlier. Stepping on the nearby button opens a hole in the ceiling and the lamp rockets away into the sky, fully illuminating the room, which we now see is actually tilted on its side. Just next door is the final boss of the map, who we send straight back to heck by activating a gigantic version of the Thunderbolt gun. This whole blasting something with a huge cannon activity is going to come back repeatedly throughout all of the maps and mods we're going to look at in this video. Really, just about everything we've seen here, the surrealism, the unique architecture, the cute/funny bits, and obviously the anime girls, will all be making repeat appearances, to the point that WCA for Quake feels like a prototype or statement of intent for what's to come over the next few years. KS's first Half-Life mod, Pieces Like Us, is still to this day one of the coolest and most unique mods ever made for Half-Life, and easily one of my personal favorites. If you're watching this video, you more than likely don't need any introduction to Half-Life, but just to provide you with a small crumb of context. Valve Software released Half-Life in 1998, just 2 years after Quake 1, and despite being built upon much of the same tech as that game, presented itself as a more story-focused and realistic experience, as silly as that might feel to say today.
Reading.
So while custom single-player creations for Quake would often consist of just a single map, the increased complexity of Half-Life's presentation meant that it was possible, and to some degree expected, that its homemade single-player experiences would consist of multiple maps as part of a greater, typically storyline-driven campaign. Unlike with Quake, I have been playing Half-Life since the game first released, and have been following its mod scene nearly as long. The first Half-Life mod I ever played was USS Darkstar, a mod included on the demo disc that came with the August 1999 issue of PC Gamer. I hated it. Luckily though, the mod's author Neil Mankey would team up again with PC Gamer the next year for a mod I loved, Day Hunger. I mention all of this to say I was so close to playing Pieces Like Us when it was packed in with the July 2002 edition of PC Gamer. I distinctly remember reading this bit about a mod to make Max Payne nude.
Hey Paul, I'm Payne, your latest dancer. I can't wait to entertain you.
Now Payne I can get into. Is there any way to generate a nude Payne?
Not computing. Please repeat.
Nude Payne.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh!
Located right next to their write-up about PLU, I played the shit out of Dungeon Siege's sweet 192 megabyte demo, and didn't even consider playing a Half-Life mod that would have maybe, possibly changed my life. Shameful. Pieces Like Us is, at a glance of its screenshots, pretty standard for a Half-Life mod released in the year 2000. It'd be easy to assume, based on its use of mostly vanilla Half-Life assets, that it's one of the many mods that chooses to tell a side story or sequel to the base campaign, but this actually isn't the case at all. PLU supposes an alternate timeline that's pretty cleverly summarized through this image that acts as the mod's cover art and also appears within the game's first map. Humanity met the Zen aliens, everyone was chill, and now we all work and live together in harmony. KS uses scripted sequences within Half-Life to great effect in these opening minutes, making some of the cutest shit I've ever seen depicted in the Gold Source engine. Subverting our expectations in regards to who is friend and who is foe is another thing KS will go on to play around with in the future, but I think it's at its best here. Half-Life's aliens have always been kinda adorable little freaks, and it's very easy to mentally switch over to viewing them as friends, something Valve seems to be aware of as well. However, the military won't stand for this severe lack of violence and attacks the science base. This is still an FPS after all, and seeing this sad, scared little hound eye was all the motivation I needed to pick up the crowbar. Pieces Like Us is about an hour and a half long, and for the most part plays out about how you'd expect. Fighting the military, vent crawling, powering up and down machinery, the usual Half-Life stuff. But the mod is also much less devoted to depicting its science facility in a way that makes logical sense than the original game or some of its more modern mods. It has a somewhat haphazard environmental design, mixing Zen and Black Mesa textures and objects all willy-nilly, giving it a surreal vibe that feels like a halfway point between Half-Life and Quake. This fast transit method of using a piston to jettison the passenger through a water slide-like tube would never pass inspection if it were in Black Mesa, but it's such a funny thing to throw in here and suits the more lighthearted tone of PLU. I also love its dedication to continuing to depict the camaraderie between the humans and aliens throughout the runtime. It's fun to have the Gargantua's massive strength and size on your side for once. Look how sad this poor Vortigaunt is over the death of his best bud Barney. Oh my god. Even species of lower intelligence seem to have been well cared for here. Eventually we come across a strange machine, possibly the culmination of the human and Zen scientific collaboration, and we stumble our way into PLU's Another World chapter. I gotta be honest, hitting this point in the game for the first time made my jaw drop. Another World really is the perfect name for it. There's nothing else quite like this in any other mod I've played before or since. The music, composed by KS himself, feels simultaneously completely at odds with anything in the base game, but also fits here beautifully. The walls and ceilings are bare concrete and have this white to blue gradient that makes each room feel slightly cold, but the shafts of sunlight coming in through the windows and the cathedral-like architecture keep it from feeling completely lifeless. The checkerboard flooring is another visual element we'll see pop up in KS's stuff, but here it really is the finishing touch that brings this portion of the map together in this perfect dreamlike way. Another World is the first and only place where we'll fight against any Zen aliens, but they're differentiated here through a ghostly, translucent appearance. In his production notes for the game, KS mentions doing this as a way to keep the player from getting bored of fighting only soldiers for the most part, but also not wanting the aliens to be seen as anything but friends. Each room of Another World has some kind of unexpected visual twist to it, a hallway that not only itself appears skewed, but all objects within it as well. A room with massive, functioning clocks, floating geometric shapes, and an ichthyosaur-infested pool below. KS tends to reference a lot of artists and architects' works in these mods, and look, I ain't no Jacob Geller. I'm not academically minded enough to give you any kind of history lesson here, so I'll apologize in advance for any potential errors I make in these matters, but I do find this element of his work interesting, and I want to point it out when I can. In an interview hosted on Personal Half-Quake in 2004, KS mentions Paul Klee and MC Escher as artists whose work he admires, and even from my uneducated-ass perspective, the inspiration is pretty apparent throughout the Another World chapter of Pieces Like Us. But even Another World maintains some of the silliness we'll come to expect with these mods. This circular object embedded into the decorative concrete of its first room, very likely the very first thing you see upon arrival, is just the packaging for a cool flavored cough drop. Amazing. At the end of the first map is a floating, rotating structure that didn't require me to dig up architectural journals from the 1950s though, as I recognized it pretty quickly as being modeled after the Recognizer vehicle from the 1982 snooze fest Tron. After climbing on top, we're able to reach the button that opens up the door to the second map of Another World. As much as I love the first half of Another World, this map is where I truly fell in love with Pieces Like Us. There's an audacity to showcasing your seemingly superfluous anime girl illustrations in the main progression necessary climax of your mod that I can't help but respect. Seeing little nods or references to a map author's personal life or interests is not unheard of course, but these tend to be tucked away in hard-to-find areas or often require no clipping through the level to see them, hidden from all but the most dedicated of Easter egg hunters. KS calls these mappers cowards and says, no, you will look at my bodysuited babe if you want to progress to the end of the game. Well, KS did still make some of these illustrations a little harder to come across. Shooting at one of the throat lozenge logos I mentioned earlier opens up a secret room featuring a swimsuit-wearing woman with some wild anatomy.
Oh my god.
As well as a row of aliens, a massive HEV refill machine, and this bizarre first aid couch that I kinda love for some reason. Another secret room, this time accessed via a hidden button in that tilted room from earlier, features another massive poster of a woman, this time in a black leather outfit. If you waste half of your inventory blowing it up, you'll be presented with a link to a zip file. I gotta admit, there's something kind of thrilling about manually typing in some long-ass link to an ancient and buried 25-year-old zip file named pic.zip no less. Who knows what could be in here? I love the cadence of this readme file, it has Dark Souls player message energy. You found secret. This is a reward. Oh, worthless. But yeah, it's just the same illustrations in a slightly higher res than if you were to rip the texture files yourself. Maybe you could make the argument, and some certainly did, that these illustrations feel out of place, but looking at Pieces Like Us in the context of what came before it, all of this does make some sense. On the description page for PLU, KS says that he viewed and designed his maps and mods to be like playable versions of his artwork. Pieces Like Us may skew more toward the gameplay side of that equation than WCA for Quake did, but it still ultimately acts as a showcase for his artistic interests and endeavors. In KS's words, the fusion of otaku culture and the avant-garde surreal world. The dissonance between these illustrations, their surrounding environment, and even the choice of game is itself the point. This is architecture plus girl. The final illustration within the mod is towards the end of the Another World chapter, a reward for surviving PLU's surprisingly deadly variation of the classic Half-Life tram ride. This one's cute, she's got Sailor Moon vibes. Some recognizer bots crash through her, making space for us to pass, but destroying the artwork in the process. Pic.zip includes a slightly different version of this artwork, with the added text, "Why is it Half-Life?" In production notes and interviews, KS tends to preemptively answer questions about what does this mean, with something along the lines of, it doesn't mean anything, don't worry about it. And, you know, fair enough. Pieces Like Us is a catchy name, it doesn't have to mean anything, sure. But in the case of this illustration, I think there is some meaning to the destruction of the artwork and the added caption. Part of it is the dichotomy between this art style and Half-Life that we just discussed, but I think there's something else being commented on here that we'll get to with the next mod. Now, as far as why this tram ride ends with a giant glowing red cross, I have no idea, but it made me absolutely cackle, and it does make for some pretty badass screenshots, so that's good enough for me. Our final action is to ride one of the recognizer bots to the top of this impossible dream structure, where Barney and a Vortigaunt show up in a spaceship to bring us back to the science facility.
Come on, Gordon. You trying to get me into trouble?
The last segment of the mod sees us rescuing some of the Zenlings from cages before we end up in a cage ourselves, imprisoned by the military and G-Man. The newly freed citizens of Zen haven't forgotten our kindness though, and operate a massive laser, similar to the one from WCA, to blast G-Man and the soldiers to bits, with some great comedic timing. The friends we made along the way gather around our injured, or maybe dead, body, and a Vortigaunt brings us to the Nihilanth, who is able to bring us back to consciousness, ending the mod on a sweet note. If you've played a bit of Half-Life over the years and you're okay with a little jank here and there, I definitely recommend playing pieces like us for yourself, but there are some things to keep in mind if you choose to do so. If you simply Google pieces like us, the first result will be a ModDB page, as you might expect. However, this is not the original mod, and is instead a fan-modified version of it featuring some pretty bizarre changes.
Who are you?
No food bowl for the Hound Eye? Not my pieces like us. This is actually something I've come across a few times while covering Half-Life mods for this channel. A lot of these older mods don't behave properly with modern versions of Half-Life, especially since the anniversary update a couple years back, so I appreciate that there are people out there updating abandoned mods to play without issues. I don't even really think there's a problem with people making changes to the mods, as long as it's very clearly indicated somewhere, as tends to be the case with remods. Sorry if this feels like a tangent, but like some of the most popular Let's Plays for this mod are using this weird fan-patched version and don't seem to realize it, and in fairness, why would they? The ModDB uploader has straight up called it PLU version 2.0, and they don't appear to explain anywhere that this is actually a fan remod. Preserving these old mods in their original form is important, especially one like this, where the current official download links and the archive links are all dead. So, as of now, the best way to get PLU is from the Half-Life fan site Run, Think, Shoot, Live, which I'll link in the description for this video. My final recommendation is to play the mod through
Ksash
3D FWGS. We've talked about it a little in a previous video, so I won't go over it in detail here, but it's basically a custom engine for Half-Life that tends to play nicer with old mods like this. I've tried running pieces like us under the newest Steam release of Half-Life, and while it does seem to load up okay, it's definitely possible that it'll have issues somewhere along the way. Ksash is easy to set up and is typically my preferred option when I want to play old mods. So, we've arrived back where we started. KS's 2001 Half-Life mod, Sweet Half-Life. The mod that originally sent me down this rabbit hole, and actually, was a big part of why I even started this channel to begin with. I'd been digging around looking for mods to cover for the Half-Life mods video, and came across the ModDB page for Sweet. Seeing these promotional images, especially this one, featuring a girl with cross-shaped earrings and wearing an HEV suit, absolutely ignited my brain. I went to a bar with friends that same night and spent most of the time on my phone, looking for any information I could find about this mod and its enigmatic hazard suit-clad woman, eventually finding KS's old webpage and his other mods. Mark Ellis's single-player mod. Wait, what does this mean? Well, this is the first and only project I'll be covering here that was a team effort. Mark's team, as they're credited in the game's intro sequence. The full team and their roles within the project are listed on the mod's official page, but the question of who did what is a little more complicated than this page suggests, something we'll touch on a bit more later. For now, let's get back to the game itself. Sweet Half-Life is one of the few mods I can think of that bothers to include a custom training room map, a fact that I completely overlooked on my first playthrough. Which is too bad, because it actually does a lot to set up the premise of the mod, to the point that I think this probably should have been where you start when clicking New Game. In Sweet Half-Life, we play as Gordon McGinley, warehouse manager of the Black Mesa Research Facility, clocking in for a regular day on the job. Immediately, Sweet is much closer to what you'd expect from a Half-Life mod of its time than Pieces. No cross-species cooperation, just scientists and security guards hanging out. We head outside to receive a special shipment brought in by the military, use our warehouse training to personally deliver it to the scientists awaiting its arrival, and watch an unboxing presentation by G-Man where it's revealed that we are, somehow, the second person named Gordon to be directly involved in the resonance cascade that will eventually spill the Zen world into our own, meaning all of the events of Sweet Half-Life are actually happening just off to the side of the events in regular, unsweetened Half-Life. With our warehouse management duties out of the way, Today, we can start a new game proper, which opens on the traditional Half-Life tram ride, albeit from a non-traditional camera angle. Up to this point, there hasn't been much to suggest KS's involvement in this mod, but right down the stairs from this first room is a poster featuring the first, and probably most interesting, of his signature illustrations that we'll see within Suite. Something is wrong in Japan. I wasn't sure what to make of this poster when I came across it in my first playthrough a few years ago, but it stuck out to me much more when I saw it this time around. While researching for this video, I've come across a lot of comments on KS's work that amount to, "This is cool, but all of that weird anime stuff ruins it." I couldn't help but wonder if this poster was intended as some kind of commentary on this line of thinking, and so I decided to dig a little further. I want to be super clear here that the aim of this video is to share these specific works and what I personally find cool and interesting about them, and I want to be careful not to focus too much on KS's writings or non-FPS related works. There are multiple reasons for this, but a big one is simply that I don't speak Japanese. KS has published a ton of interesting developer commentary for each of these mods, and while I feel that Google's translation is probably portraying the gist of these blogs relatively accurately, I don't want to directly refer to them unless I feel that it's necessary in relation to talking about the work itself, and if I'm able to cross-reference them in some way. Also, frankly, KS seems like a relatively private person, and I'd like to be as respectful of that as possible. Suite Half-Life was patched in July 2003. A few bug fixes, a few changes like swapping the main menu image from this one to this one, but the patch also mentions some changes to textures, the most interesting of which being related to this poster, which looked like this in the 1.0 release. The changes may seem minor, but according to KS's blog, the poster was a point of contention between himself and another team member, Gareth Lowe, who worried that the poster would be misunderstood and upset players. KS seemed to feel that there was a pattern of players disliking these illustrations existing within his mods just because of their art style. This sentiment is one that I personally remember encountering just about everywhere games were being discussed, sometimes in sort of cheeky ways, but often descending into outright racism. Even people who liked Japanese games made sure to preempt their writings with, "Yes, this game is weird in Japanesey, but it's actually good." I think the proliferation of the internet would help somewhat in broadening people's perspectives over the years, but even today, even just talking about Suite Half-Life, it seems that a lot of the coverage of this mod is fixated on how weird it is, in a way that feels exactly like what KS was trying to comment on with the "Something is Wrong in Japan" poster over 20 years ago. In fairness, there is a lot of weird stuff in this mod in particular, and the entire architecture plus girl concept is intentionally evoking these feelings to some degree. I just hope that this video is able to communicate that these mods are not weird just to be weird, and viewing art through this lens only serves to distance you from experiences you might otherwise enjoy. Suite Half-Life is a little over double the length of Pieces Like Us, about 3.5 hours or so to complete both routes. The first half of this runtime adheres much more closely to the formula of the original Half-Life campaign than Pieces Like Us did, so we're going to focus on some standout moments, with the understanding that said moments are occurring between the regular old Half-Life stuff that you've seen a million times before, just with the occasional KS visual flair here and there, if you know what you're looking for. Suite was the first of these mods that I played, and I remember feeling a little disappointed by it after the first 20 minutes or so. Maybe I shouldn't cover this one for the Half-Life mods vid. Maybe the menu art is the most interesting thing about it. Maybe... Wait, is that her? More like half-wife, am I right, gamers? I genuinely did not expect to actually see this woman within the game itself, but we'll be seeing her return relatively frequently throughout the mod, often acting as our savior when we need her most, but always in this just-out-of-reach manner, never directly interacting or speaking with the player. It seems as if this approach to preserving an air of mystery around her was born of an attempt to solve the problem of lacking a female voice actor for the character, which I think turned out for the best. There's just one custom voice line early on in the mod, and it's about what you'd expect for a Half-Life mod from 2001.
What is going on? Go and find out what is happening at the cargo terminal.
Though she's never named within the game, KS refers to her in this same blog post as Enigma, so that's how I'll be referring to her from now on as well. Obviously, Enigma doesn't quite make a perfect transition to 3D and certainly sticks out a bit when standing next to the vanilla Half-Life characters, though as we've discussed, that's also part of the charm. But I think she works well in her role here as a sort of anti-G-Man, similarly powerful and mysterious, but with intentions more clearly directed towards the player's well-being. Enigma is gone before we can so much as utter a thank you, and it's on to the office portion of Black Mesa. Along this moving sidewalk here is our next poster illustrated by KS, depicting two angelic figures, the words adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, and a bunch of other text that's too low-res to make out. Interestingly, in the first release of Sweet Half-Life, this was just a generic Black Mesa poster that you can see throughout the original game, but this one was added in with the 2003 patch that I mentioned earlier. KS does tend to use religious imagery somewhat frequently in his illustrations, but my only guess is that maybe this is meant to tease KS's next project, as it does bear some resemblance to a poster we'll be seeing in the next mod. Just down the hall, we can hear a highly compressed and loudly blasting concerto from Vivaldi's harmonic inspiration, listened to and seemingly enjoyed by a lone Vortigaunt. This is another just out of reach character we'll be crossing paths with occasionally, and acts as the mod's requisite "aliens are our friends" representation. Just outside, we'll have our first encounter with a new enemy type, a minigun-wielding buff boy, who may be familiar to you if you're especially Half-Life pilled. This human sergeant enemy is a resurrection of an enemy type cut from the original game before retail release, and is actually one of a few examples of this within Suites. We can even acquire the minigun for ourselves. Enigma shows up again and single-handedly distracts two Gargantuas while we make our way back through the tunnel area from the tutorial segment, now broken down and covered in webs. There's a boombox in here that, if interacted with, will play some music created for the mod by KS. KS's music is actually pretty great, and we'll talk about it more later, but sadly there's some issues with its usage here, one of which being that it's mixed quite loudly. The other is that these multiple-minute songs are broken up into these heavily compressed 15-second loops that get repetitive pretty quickly. It's funny now to see KS bashfully admitting to the 8 megabyte download size of Pieces Like Us, or the enormous Sweet Half-Life, which asked for 25 of God's own megabytes. But plenty of people were still on 56K dial-up in those days, and hogging the family's phone line for 2 hours while your Anime Girl Half-Life mod downloaded very well could have been a big ask, so 5-minute-long high-quality custom music would have likely been out of the question. So we handle the two Gargantuas weakened by Enigma, but a third is on the loose, and we choose to make a run for it with our good pal Barney. Whew, that was close, wasn't it, bud? Alright, let's get the hell out of here. It's hard to get a good look with all the commotion, but there's another illustration here, this time a parody of Apple's then popular "Think Different" slogan. The 2003 patch updated this poster as well, so here's the 1.0 version. It seems as if we've found our ticket out of Black Mesa, but our cozy train ride is interrupted by a barrage of missiles. We've already seen the most obvious of these, but Sweet Half-Life is full of references to movies, this one of course being the scene from the original Mission Impossible, where Tom Cruise faces off against a helicopter while riding on top of a train. It's a bit clunky from a gameplay perspective, but it's impressive how convincing this scene is visually, with the train cars getting blown up bit by bit. Our train ride at its end, we arrive at our fourth and final illustration to be seen within Suites, maybe my personal favorite actually. Girls Not Slave. I love how characteristically cryptic KS is about it too. This one was also updated with the patch, and I think most clearly demonstrates KS's growth as an artist between these years. Enigma makes another brief appearance here, and we get to fight alongside an HEV-suited scientist for the first time. They can take a lot more punishment than the security guards and tend to carry some kind of power weapon, but most importantly, they have this ridiculous pitch-down voice effect.
This is all within theoretical limits.
Glad to oblige a fellow scientist.
That other Gordon can be spotted here if you're quick, but he seems surprisingly uninterested in the fucking actual Area 51-ass gray alien on display just behind us, marking the turning point where Sweet comes fully off of the tram line, and the suggestion that this is all happening in the same world as the original Half-Life becomes a little absurd.
I suspected this could happen, but the administrator just wouldn't.
It's fairly easy to spot the Mission Impossible inspiration from the train sequence earlier, but if you've never seen that movie, it doesn't really matter. I hadn't seen the movie Brazil the first time I played Sweet, so this recreation of one of its iconic scenes flew right over my head and felt sort of out of place. Well, technically, I still haven't seen Brazil. I put it on the other night, but it was too boring and British, so I watched Tokyo Fist instead. That movie rules and, strangely, has some visual similarities to some of the stuff we'll look at later. Going into Sweet without knowing what to expect, walking into the hangar area, and being greeted with actual flying saucers immediately followed by getting photon blasted by little gray men was genuinely shocking. As strange as this sudden shift to 50s or 60s era sci-fi feels, there was some sensible logic behind it. Considering the whole premise of Half-Life centers around an alien invasion in New Mexico, it's almost surprising that no one else reached this idea of Area 51 having ties to the Black Mesa facility before Sweet did, especially considering how much these little guys had re-entered mainstream culture around this time. I cannot explain to you the mental stranglehold that the 1995 Alien Autopsy video had on me as a kid, so I'd probably have eaten this up. Of course, we can use their orb-emitting weaponry ourselves, but I'm not even sure how to describe this thing. It feels incredibly dinky and unsatisfying to use, but it actually hits quite hard with each shot, though the slow travel of the projectiles makes it a bit hard to aim at any kind of moving target. It's also hard to gauge its usefulness because these bare butt-naked gray boys can somehow take a ton of ammo to put down, regardless of what weapon you're using. This is also where the mod diverges into its separate routes, so we'll take the more obvious of the two for the time being by climbing through this pipe. I typically prefer when Half-Life mods continue in the base game's footsteps and never leave the first-person perspective, but KS's cutscenes tend to be so creative and funny that I don't really mind the break from tradition. We couldn't possibly have flying saucers without an abduction sequence, so after a little prodding on board, we're dumped unceremoniously back onto Zen, along with some of the HEV-suited super soldier scientists. It wasn't exactly clear before, but we learn here that the Greys and the Zen aliens aren't exactly on good terms. I really like KS's interpretation of a Zen aircraft, just a big tube with teeth, apparently powered by a room full of eyeballs too. After bringing down the ship, we're tossed back onto Zen and tasked with retrieving a crystal from the top of this tower for reasons unclear, though I suspect it's just an excuse for another film reference, this time to the 1996 Roland Emmerich film Independence Day. My sister and I loved this movie as kids, but we could never remember the name, so we'd just beg my dad to rent us The Fire Movie whenever he went to the video store. I still think this design for the aliens, a little squishy boy riding inside of a big flesh mech, is really cool. We had a toy of one of these, and they came with these sick translucent floppy disks with trashy minigames on them, though I honestly can't remember if we ever actually played them. The final boss for this round is another enemy that was brought back from the dead after being cut from the final version of Half-Life, the Kingpin, a psychic slug that can rip apart and hit you with chunks of the environment and taunts you throughout the fight by filling your screen with text. I love the way this fight uses a function of the game originally intended for flavor or chapter text to portray your character being psychically attacked. Almost feels fourth wall breaking, and it just looks cool. Does make it hard to aim at times, but it probably would be hard to aim if you had this thing screaming at you to kill yourself. Unfortunately, defeating the Kingpin isn't enough to save us from the entire Zen army that wants us dead. But just in time, our Vivaldi-enjoying Vortigaunt buddy shows up and exposes his people to the beauty of classical music. Rendering them uninterested in their previous violent intentions. As we head back to the flying saucer, we can see Freeman and the G-Man teleport away. We board the saucer and are teleported away as well, as the screen cuts to the ending from the original game, where Freeman and G-Man converse on an interdimensional tram ride, pulling out to reveal the player character riding on top. I think this is such a funny ending, like, yeah dude, there was another guy named Gordon in an HEV suit right above you that whole time. Damn, truth truly does become obvious. After the credits have rolled, we get a final shot of Vivaldi Vorti jamming out, but the music cuts to static as we're reminded that the gray aliens are still making their way to Earth and that the story isn't quite finished. Let's rewind back to that hangar with the flying saucers. In a room off to the side, there's a spinning ethereal cube that, when broken free, will fly off and enter one of the ships. Doing this will power up the saucer, which flies out and blasts some generic 1950s sci-fi music before tractor beaming up the rampaging gonard like a cow. A cute scene, but we actually need to go back inside and release another ethereal cube, this time awakening a saucer that we're able to ride all the way back to the mothership seen in the first ending. The mothership doesn't ever reach the surreal heights of Another World from Pieces Like Us, but it definitely manages to feel sufficiently alien compared to anything else we've seen yet. I appreciate the attempt at setting the mood for this bold shift in genre with some background music, but this particular loop does get pretty annoying before long. One of the first rooms we'll fight through features various Earth and Zen abductees imprisoned behind green glass, which immediately reminded me of this area from a leaked early alpha build of Half-Life. However, unless I'm missing something, this particular area was never seen publicly before said alpha leaked in 2013. There is a similar area shown in a pre-release trailer with alien grunts encased in green glass, contained within Half-Life preliminary findings, a promotional disc included with certain Sierra titles in 1997. Interesting stuff, but I'm gonna call this one a coincidence. The mothership segment is somewhat of a slog, as the visuals here can get a bit monotonous, and the gray aliens just take so much time to kill. Eventually we'll come across some human soldiers who we can set free and who will aid us in the upcoming battle, which is great because this last fight is pretty brutal. The armies of Zen, now allied with humanity through the power of music, send a Gargantua who sacrifices itself to provide us with another Independence Day reference and prevent a massive laser from destroying Earth from orbit. Though the Earth is safe for now, we have one final battle to fight before the Greys are dealt with for good. The last boss for this route isn't as cool as the other one, sadly, just a somewhat generic Grey spaceship that's relatively easy to cheese. Or it would be if the game didn't crash so much here. This is where I should mention that, unlike pieces like us, I do recommend downloading the fan patch version of Suite from ModDB, even if you're running it in Kasash. This patch doesn't change or add anything, but does fix all of the crashes from what I can tell, as well as fixes some HUD issues like properly displaying the icons in the crosshairs for the new weapons. Taking out the small ship causes a capsule to lower from the ceiling. As it depressurizes and begins to open, a hauntingly familiar choir begins to hum, as an equally familiar black monolith is revealed to be contained within. As white streaks of lightning encompass the chamber, the player is transported to a black void and presented with Sweet Half-Life's most elaborate film reference, a full recreation of the surreal final sequence of Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Even after the seal had long been broken on film references within this mod, I have to admit I was cackling at both the sheer boldness of doing this, but also at just how good of a job KS did at capturing the magic of it within Half-Life's Gold Source engine. There's just something so cute about the low-poly approximations of every detail in this room. KS explains the process of this map's creation in his blog, watching and rewatching the tape to get everything as close as possible, and using his creative judgment for any areas that aren't fully displayed. I particularly love these statues and the contrast of the Half-Lifean orange wall behind them. Maybe you could ding the room for an accuracy point because the paintings aren't the same as the ones from the film, but I'd argue these somewhat generic landscapes work even better in this Half-Life X 2001 homage, as slapping some Thomas Kincaid-ass paintings into your Gold Source map feels like a time-honored tradition at this point. The way this whole scene actually plays out is great, so I'm just gonna present it to you here unedited. We find ourselves back on Zen, and the rest of this route plays out in more or less the same way as the primary route. That is, until we see our favorite Vortigaunt's radio become suddenly replaced by the monolith, which plays a loud, monotone sound that seems to inflict pain on our poor pal. I honestly have no idea what this is meant to communicate, and I feel bad for the little guy. So my chosen headcanon is that this is what actually frees the Vortigaunts from their shackles and allows them to speak freely in Half-Life 2. Finally, we cut to Adrian Shepard, the protagonist from Half-Life's first expansion pack, Opposing Force, seated in lonesome contemplation by a campfire on a floating island within a black void. The dreary atmosphere is sliced away by Half-Life's surprisingly cheerful credits music as a strange vessel appears and sweet girl herself, Enigma, emerges from within, greeting Shepard and whisking him away from his solitude. As silly as all of this can get, it's once again hard not to be charmed by KS's interpretation of the Half-Life universe, and I really can't help but wish for a sequel in a similar vein, following our friends Enigma, Vivaldi Vortigaunt, Shepard, and other Gordon through the events of Half-Life 2 just out of view of Freeman. Alas, the increased complexity of Half-Life 2 and its source engine alone alone is reason enough that a project of that scope would likely be difficult for one person to complete. Something I noticed while reading through the production blogs for Sweet Half-Life is that for as much as Mark's name appears all over the promotional material, it seems to me like the vast majority of work that went into the year-long production of Sweet was done by KS, followed by Gareth Lowe, who did coding and modeling. I want to stress here that I don't say this to condemn anyone else involved in the project, but for one reason or another, what began as Mark Ellis's single-player mod seemingly became much more KS's single-player mod. Near the end of 2001, the developers of an upcoming anime-styled total conversion mod called Squadron Ghost reached out to KS in hopes of adding him to their team as a mapper. Squadron Ghost is an entire rabbit hole in and of itself that I don't have time to get into here, and unfortunately, as cool as it was shaping up to be over the next few years, would never see any kind of public release before being cancelled sometime in 2004. KS declined the offer to work on the mod, saying that he no longer felt interested in mapping, but did illustrate a couple of the characters in a wallpaper for them. Sweet Half-Life is an enormous mod, and honestly, I can't imagine how much work it must have been to complete all of these maps in just a year. It's very easy to understand his apprehension around cracking open the map editor again so soon for another team project. KS would also begin working with the Gold Source engine in a professional capacity around this time, participating in the development of Counter-Strike Neo, a modified version of Counter-Strike with an anime art style, exclusive to Namco's Lead Zone arcade in Tokyo. Neo is also a rabbit hole that could easily be the topic of an entire video itself, with massive changes like an entirely new cast of characters, new maps, and even an entire spin-off series of visual novels. But we'll leave it here for now. Despite expressions of disinterest in mapping, it seems the call of Half-Life 2's shiny new source engine was too loud to ignore, and in 2005, just a year after the game's release, KS would release his final mod, Mistake of Pythagoras. For as much as Half-Life changes as a game between its first and second entry, Mistake of Pythagoras feels, surprisingly, almost like a spiritual successor to pieces like Us. And I gotta say, I absolutely love this return to form. One of my favorite things about Pieces was how much it was able to feel like a completely new experience, despite using very few custom assets, and MOP takes this sense of unique identity even further. The game begins within a city of the familiar, vaguely Eastern European design that you'd expect from Half-Life 2, where huge concrete numbers have begun falling from the sky after some kind of experiment gone sideways. So although we'll be seeing familiar faces and hearing familiar voices,
Well, I'll be damned.
none of this has any relation to the story you know from Half-Life 2, and much like Pieces, interspecies cooperation is a given here. As we wander the city, we catch a glimpse of an otherworldly black and white spiral that seems to be the source of the concrete number rain, and panic escalates as ghostly versions of Half-Life 2's manhack enemy start attacking people in the streets. To make matters worse, the city is beset by large flying machines, seemingly impervious to gunfire. I love the design of these guys. They feel like the machines from Nier Automata by way of the Garry's Mod constructor tool. They're weirdly cute. But watching them chop a Strider to bits is actually kind of fricked up, and sufficiently sets them up as the unthinking killing machines that they seem to be. Things only escalate from there as new types of machines start appearing and causing mayhem. The worst of which being this massive death machine, sort of a triangular version of the Zen ships that we saw in Sweet. Zombies begin to roam the streets too, seemingly disseminated by these machines. I know this barely needs to be said, but the jump in technology from Half-Life 1 to 2 is still absolutely wild to me, and it's so impressive how well Chaos is able to utilize its new tools to sell this invasion, especially so soon after the game's release. We eventually make our way to the site of the experiment gone wrong, and the best minds of the human and Combine scientists devise a plan for us to enter one of the spirals and put a stop to all of the chaos. This opening area of unknown enemies, Chapter 2 of Mistake of Pythagoras, is to me one of, if not the most striking scenes ever depicted within the Source engine. Over the years, Valve's engine has seemed to develop an association with dreamlike, ethereal, and liminal imagery. If you ask me, that aesthetic was born and perfected in 2005 with this single map. This imagery deserves to be every bit as iconic as something like GM Construct. Whereas Sweet Half-Life brought the girl portion of the architecture plus girl to the third dimension, MOP raises the bar in the architecture department. This map's lone building is actually based specifically on a never-constructed design by 18th century French architect Claude Nicolas Ledoux as part of his Ideal City project. Again, I'm not one to give history lessons, but I certainly think KS has captured what makes the structure so evocative in these illustrations. Part of what really sells the scene, though, is the strangely fanciful music, composed by KS, who has clearly honed his skill quite a bit since Sweet Half-Life. We'll talk more about the music soon, but for now, let's squash some of these bugs and head inside. For as much as I appreciate the exterior of the building, there's just as much I find appealing about the interior. In another mod, this might all come together in a way that makes it feel unfinished or haphazard, but here it just feels, and I'm sorry to keep repeating this word, perfectly dreamlike. It's an impossible building, not because it would be literally impossible to recreate in this way, but just that a waking human being simply never would. There's a single puzzle to solve here involving restoring power to the building, allowing us to open a portal and summon forth our good friend Alternate Universe Barney, and a small army of allied Combine soldiers. This does, unfortunately, draw the attention of the massive flying machine from earlier, who whisks all of us away to a new map. Did I say unfortunately? I actually meant fortunately, because this map too is an absolute banger, consisting almost entirely of a single structure, again a recreation of a design by C.N. Ledoux. This one advances time to the early evening, with a sunset coating the white building in a warm yellow, and providing some dramatic lighting inside. In the section for Pieces Like Us, I mentioned KS's stated desire to create a sort of playable artistic showcase. And where Pieces did pull that off in some places, I think MOP really nails it throughout. It's the gallery room from weird comic art all the way back in Quake, just for a different art form. We get another piece of music here, and unsurprisingly, it's great as well. One of my favorite tracks in the game is the main menu music. The composer Philip Glass comes up constantly in the development blogs and interviews for these games over the years, and while the influence is definitely there in previous mods, it's really hitting in full force here. More specifically, KS writes extensively about and makes frequent reference to the 1982 film Koyaanisqatsi. The film contains no dialogue or characters and consists entirely of shots of landscapes and, as the film progresses, human societies and cities. What makes it work is the score, composed by Philip Glass, which, and I cannot stress this enough, absolutely fucks. Actually, even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably heard the score. I watched the movie for the first time as part of researching for this video, and it instantly shot me back in time to 2007. Watching that iconic GTA 4 reveal trailer on repeat, which, it turns out, is basically just Koyaanisqatsi. In 2011, KS released a Counter-Strike source map called DE Obsession. It's a strange map, in part because so much of what makes it interesting exists far above the player's eye level. I have no idea how well this map actually plays in a real match, but I love it from a visual perspective. Absolutely Koyaanisqatsi core. The description submitted with the map reads simply, "Aesthetics of repetition, minimal, pressure, strain, and continuation." But as is often the case with KS's works, we can learn more by searching the walls. Near one of the bomb plant points is a poster that reads Hochhausstadt Ludwig Hilbersheimer's city plan over an illustration of a city. Hochhausstadt, or high-rise city, was Hilbersheimer's 1924 proposal for a sort of idealized socialist city, partially a criticism of American urban planning. Though Hilbersheimer would eventually live and work in the United States after coming under suspicion of the Nazis in the 1930s for his left-wing views. While not a one-to-one recreation of the illustration like the ones in MOP, there are some clear similarities, like the rows of repetitive buildings and the suspended walkways, though Obsession imagines a train system here rather than cars. There's actually a second poster of interest within DE Obsession, this one depicting a 3D model of a pair of buildings with the text Leonidov Narkomtyashprom. I swear I really don't want to make a stupid joke about not being able to pronounce this, but I really can't do it. It's not even a good joke, and it just adds to my work in editing. I'm sorry. I really tried. Referencing Russian architect Ivan Leonidov's entry into the 1934 contest to design buildings for the People's Commissariat of Heavy Industry in Moscow. Also in 2011, KS released a Half-Life 2 mod called Visionary Architecture 01, or simply Leonidov. By far his most architecture-pilled work, and the furthest on the art side of the art versus gameplay spectrum, Leonidov is a full recreation of Ivan Leonidov's proposal, as well as a sort of virtual museum exhibit, guiding the player along a designated path and providing informational text at each stop, though of course you're free to explore as you wish. I love this map, and I've spent a lot of time gathering footage and looking around in here. The source engine just feels made for this type of thing. While nearly all of these mods and maps require some level of finagling to get to play properly, this one is by far the closest to being unable to be experienced as intended, as playing it requires usage of command prompts and old-ass versions of the source SDK, so who knows how long this will be playable. For the sake of preservation, I'll go ahead and upload the full guided tour portion of the mod onto my second channel, which I'll link in the description to this video. For now, I want to take you on a different guided tour, stopping at each of my wonderful patrons. If you'd like to support the channel, have your name in the credits, or see some exclusive monthly videos, you too can subscribe to me at patreon.com/Mantron. Whew, okay, back to MOP. In another nod to pieces like us, we'll have to fight our way through translucent, ghostly versions of the base game's enemies as we ascend to the top floor, where we enter a device that teleports us away again just before the building is destroyed by the flying machine.
I'll hold him off. You'd better get going. See you when I see you, Gordon. Bring it on.
We emerge in a valley lined with brick archways, where now fully invisible enemies lie in wait. I'm not sure if this building is based on any previously existing design, but I love this giant interdimensional vortex spewing from the roof, seemingly distorting gravity around it. We don't have very long to admire much of it though, as we'll have to defend the perimeter from waves of enemies while we wait for our Strider friend to blast open the door for us. Inside the building, gravity has indeed gone wrong, and there's a pretty interesting puzzle that requires us to create our own only up style platforming sequence by strategically dropping objects that freeze in place after falling for a second or two. Another spiral portal is revealed, and we're transported again to a vastly different environment, one that, if you can believe it, feels a lot like Pieces, this time with similarities to its Another World chapter. In one of these white halls, we find a broken down white version of the flying machine that's been following us throughout the mod. Nearby, the pale walls begin to be replaced with darker bricks, and one of the smaller rust-colored machines from earlier appears to destroy a white version of itself, suggesting that the lifeless machines we continue to pass by met a similar fate. I find it so impressive how MOP manages to tell its story with not only no real dialogue, but characters that amount to, basically, a bunch of floating junk. It's a great example of how a mod can use its limitations as a strength, telling a somewhat abstract story that leaves a lot of wiggle room for interpretation, something that I personally find really fun and appealing, and something I wish more mods did. The large rusted flying machine finds its way back to us, but we're fortunately rescued by Alex and her buds, who we join on their offensive against the Rusted, as I'll be referring to them from here on. Before long, it's time to finally face off against the Strider killer from earlier. It's unfortunately one of the few misses in MOP in the gameplay department. I like it in theory, as it has some interesting verticality to it, requiring us to move up and down these ramps to get a good shot. But the pile of junk character design starts to show its limits here, as it can often be unclear whether you're doing any damage or not. Also, doesn't help that Alex tends to get herself swarmed by the 800 manhacks and zombies that it continually spawns.
Hey! Ow! Ow, quit it!
Once we do manage to take it down, we descend to the bottom of the tower, where our good friend Strider is once again ready to blast open a door for us, and we once again portal our way to another world, where we find the remains of numerous small unrusted machines, as well as a seemingly damaged or injured large one. With the way forward blocked by way of force field and a seemingly endless supply of enemy soldiers pushing us back, the damaged machine does all that it can to assist us, but they just keep coming. The triangular face of the machine begins to spin, and we find ourselves in a white room, approached by an unrusted machine, similar in appearance to the one we fought just minutes ago. Obviously, this is kind of a play at the supercharged gravity gun bit from base Half-Life 2, but combined with KS's unique visual style and music, this machine god granted ability to psychically fling enemies and objects simply by looking at them is exhilarating. It can get a little janky at times with some of the larger objects like trains, but honestly, it still kinda works given how surreal everything is in MOP. The climax of the sequence is, naturally, a face-off against our pursuant rusted death machine, in a battle that can be, sadly, a little anticlimactic if you don't know exactly what to do. We need to maintain our gaze on these large steel columns long enough to fling one into the machine, but there's not quite enough feedback relayed to the player that they're on the right track, and only one of these columns can actually be ripped from the wall, which isn't super clear. Once the machine is defeated, we're yet again teleported away, this time to a massive white hallway, beset on both sides with rows of familiar floating numbers, capped on each end by colored lights. The room is visually striking, but seems to serve only as a space for a simple puzzle that, upon solving, levitates a series of numbers from off of the floor and opens up one final spiral portal, dropping us back into the city where the mod began. I found this final sequence to be a little confusing the first time I saw it, but after playing through the mod a few times, I think I understand it a bit more, so I'm going to provide you with my interpretation of these events. While we arrive to the cheers of our comrades, the celebration is cut short by the appearance of another spiral, through which a large flying machine descends towards the city. The civilians open fire, easily dispatching the weakened machine to the joy of lookers-on. The unfortunate truth that we know, and that our comrades couldn't, is that this machine is not one of the rusted, and was actually responsible for saving us, a fact that the nearby Striders seem to be aware of. Before we were granted our power by the machine, a camera bot could be seen filming the ordeal as it occurred. As we enter the final cutscene, we see a group of Striders accompanied by, I believe, this same camera bot. Alternate universe Breen shows up, apparently an asshole in this dimension too, and seems perturbed by something the Striders have done. As the Striders walk off into the sunset, we see they've erected a memorial to the unrusted machine. I just fucking love this ending. It's this perfect mix of slightly silly and actually touching that perfectly encapsulates what I love about KS's stuff as a whole. The credits roll and that's it. That's where our story ends. Or it might have been. I mentioned this earlier, but I started working on this video almost 2 years ago now, and while I had already written a lot of words and recorded a bunch of footage, I decided to scrap most of it and approach all of this with fresh eyes. Playing Mistake of Pythagoras this time around, a question started to bubble up within my brain. Where are the freaking anime girls? Like, I kind of get it, MOP is a little artsier than the other stuff, but the Source Engine and anime girls go together like bread and butter, and what better way to embrace the fusion of otaku culture and the avant-garde surreal world than to do so in this beautifully realized avant-garde surreal world. In the first map of MOP, if we head down a particular alleyway and move some boxes around, there is one illustration plastered onto a wall depicting an angel, not too dissimilar from the figures that we found way back in Sweet Half-Life. And maybe that's all there is. But on the official page for Mistake of Pythagoras, there's a sidebar menu entry called Hint, something I somehow missed in my original attempt at research 2 years ago. The page provides hints for some gameplay sequences where the player might get stuck, but also, interestingly, some direction towards understanding the storyline of the mod. At the bottom of the page is one final cryptic passage. What are the blue cat hint and a yellow dog hint? I'm sorry, I cannot speak anything of it. Now, again, I've played MOP all the way through at least 3 times by now, and I have truly no idea what this is talking about. After a bit of Googling, I found a thread on the Valve Time forum from 2006 discussing MOP, where user Metro deals where to find each individual hint, though isn't sure how to put them together. That's enough for us to work with though, so let's hop back into MOP. Right after that early scene where the Strider is gruesomely murdered, the player is required to swim underwater and through a duct to evade the rusted death machine. If, instead, we perform some fancy footwork and activate this Combine console, the wall next to us will retreat, revealing a spiral portal and... there she is, the blue cat. Pulling the lever in front of her peels the illustration apart, revealing a series of numbers. The second hint is slightly more involved. When we first encountered the inactive white flying machine, we had to pull a plus-shaped object from the wall that reveals a passage to the next area. If, instead of discarding the plus, we bring it with us into the next area, we can insert it into this slightly less obvious depression on the brown brick wall, revealing another spiral and our next hint. Again, the illustration is pulled apart when the lever is activated, this time revealing a sequence of colors. You've probably already put this together, but we need to go back to the second to last map, the room with the floating numbers and colored lights. Essentially, what we have to do is pull each number with our gravity gun from its appropriately colored row, following the order from both sequences. Blue 1, yellow 3, orange 4, etc. I won't lie, my heart was racing while I was yanking these numbers. I remember being intrigued by this odd room my first time through, and here I was, 2 years later, finally about to crack the code. For me, only for me, a URL to a zip file. It's just like Pieces Like Us. God, what could it be? My hands trembled as I extracted the archive. It's some girls? Of course it is. What else did you expect? I'm gonna censor these, not because I think YouTube will get mad at me, they're just in bikinis, but I haven't seen these show up anywhere else, and I think it's more fun to keep it a secret. The zip file does also include a nighttime version of one of the maps from the campaign, which plays out about the same way as its sunset counterparts, apart from an appearance by the G-Man at the very end, followed by the text, "Do you return to usual, Gordon?" Perhaps hinting at some kind of follow-up to the mod, though that would never come to be. Blue Cat, the blue-haired girl, seems to be KS's favorite original character, as she's shown up quite a few times in these mods and other illustrations over the years, even greeting you on the main menu here anytime you want to check out his games. Wait, Quake 2? I'm not sure how to describe to you the collision of embarrassment and excitement that occurred in my brain when I found this. I nearly made this whole ass video 2 years ago, and it would have, somehow, been missing an entire mod. But we're here now, and we've got a new mod to play, so let's do it. This is Weird Comic Art, The Athletic and Museum, released in 1999 for Quake 2. You know, I'm so glad this worked out the way that it did, because I think that the best way for us to look at Athletic and Museum is within the context of what came before and what would come after. TAM seems to work totally fine in the recently released Quake 2 remaster, but I'm going to be playing it in a source port called Yamagi just to keep it a little more era-accurate aesthetically. Naturally, TAM iterates a bit on WCA for Quake 1, but it is kind of shocking just how many elements of it will continue to show up all the way through Mistake of Pythagoras. It's also surprising, given how cryptic most of the titles are for the other mods, how literal a title Athletic and Museum is. The first few areas are focused on movement and navigational challenges, like this platforming section of floating cubes, or this migraine-inducing maze with a checkerboard pattern, a visual that we've come across in just about every one of these mods. My favorite of these challenges is track and field, where we can compete non-violently for a change in a race with Quake 2's fastest strong athletes. Whoa, hey guys, this is bad sportsmanship. This track also doubles as a pool for the 100-meter freestyle, but these fish aren't even trying, so let's swim up to the next area. While still technically an athletics challenge, this room is our first taste of the museum side as well, featuring an MC Escher-esque structure that we need to ascend by quickly pushing sets of stairs into place. With blue key in hand, we're able to return to the entrance and restore power to the elevator outside, granting us access to the titular museum. God, this is just so cute, I love it. A warm welcome overall, but it's too bad the front desk worker attacks us. At least this guy's too tired to bother, so let's just leave him be. The first room of the museum is focused on visual art. To our left, Troublesome Tower, a render of the staircase tower we climbed earlier. Oh hey, our first anime girl, or should I say, Japanimation girl. As we've seen before, we can sit here and shoot at her for a bit, and eventually she'll pog face and drop an adrenaline pickup. The first piece on display to our right is titled Life Cycle and depicts some squiggly lines and some bars moving up and down. Hell yeah. The final piece, titled Collage, is an odd portrait mashup of people I didn't immediately recognize. In the final map of the original Quake 2 campaign, there's a hidden gallery room showcasing photos of the game's development team, 3 of which make up this collage. The slices on either side actually belong to the most well-known of the 3, John Carmack, known Ferrari haver and one of the founding members of id Software. The middle left slice depicts Christian Antkow, a level designer for the game who, for some reason, gets a little tune when you view him in the gallery. The middle right slice belongs to another level designer, Janelle Jacques, who I'll include a more recent photo of, though her demonic depiction in the remaster is pretty badass. Jacques actually worked on a number of games I've personally enjoyed over the years, but also did illustrations for Dungeons & Dragons stuff, like this absolutely sick cover art. Sadly, Jacques passed away in 2024, but it's clear her work left a big impact on a lot of people. Just a few months ago, the Quake 2 mapping community held a jam where mappers constructed 6 maps with an aesthetic similar to her own work on the game, a really cool tribute that's worth checking out if you want some more Quake 2. The next room primarily focuses on 3-dimensional arts, like this little replica Strog ship. Next we have Crystal Object, a vaguely humanoid statue made of translucent blocks. I love the simplicity of this one, a shrunken Strog Macron enclosed in glass titled A Cute Macron. Aw, he is cute. This last one, Impossible Figure, is a cool little piece of perspective art requiring use of this little elevator to give the proper viewing angle. There are 2 more pieces of 2-dimensional art in here too though. The first one, directly behind us, depicts a shambler and is titled Shambler. On the other side of the room, another girl, appropriately titled Japanimation Girl 2. The rest of the museum features art that's a little more participatory and often quite amusing, like this room titled Mass Murder Art, where you're given a BFG and different groups of enemies to fire it upon, who explode in visually and aurally satisfying ways. Really makes you think. I'll let this next one, Soldier's Performance, speak for itself. Finally, Translucent Castle is a pretty interesting piece, both architecturally and mechanically, as navigating through the castle requires you to find paths by viewing its walls from multiple angles. Pressing the button at the end of each of these displays triggers a strangely familiar sequence back in the lobby area, granting us access to the employees only area, where we find a video screen locked in on a space bend machine, and a bizarrely textured room containing a mechanism to activate it. There's actually one more illustration on the map in an area hidden within this room, but to be honest, I couldn't find a way to jump high enough to get there. But if I have to cheat for the sake of art, I will. This one seems to be titled I Don't Dance, despite the music playing. As we walk back into the main gallery, we notice that the cute Macron has disappeared from his display, when the far wall explodes and our cute little guy attacks us, unfortunately forcing us to blast him in half, seemingly asking us, "Don't you feel bad now?" And yes, I do actually. The final room of the mod features a boss fight against the flying Strog Hornets, after which we can activate the Space Bend machine, a long, laser cannon-like device that KS seems to have a particular fascination for, as machines just like this have seemed to show up in every single one of his mods. We set its destination to Earth and activate it, blasting a hole in the wall and opening a portal outside. As we head home to Earth, the text, "Goodbye, my friend," appears on screen. The camera cuts to an overhead shot of a grave marked with the letter M, as a Strog soldier walks forth and places a bouquet of flowers onto the headstone. Okay, now I really feel bad about the Macron murder. As silly as all of these mods can be, I really love how they have occasional moments like this. A lot of the most memorable sad or otherwise emotional moments in media for me tend to be the ones where you've been previously disarmed by contrastingly goofy or funny scenes, and I think KS is great at playing with these contrasts as well. Alright, I think that covers everything. I don't have any grand statement to end on. I hope you found these maps and mods as interesting as I have. Okay, hold on. What is up with this thing? We've seen this before, right? Yeah, just a few minutes ago in Quake 2. But it was also in Quake 1, wasn't it? Right, and here too. And here. Wait, I definitely saw this here too. The lamps, they're everywhere. What could this mean? I drew this based on the idea of what would happen if a light bulb suddenly made a crash sound, spread wings, and took off with force. Imagine if all the light bulbs in the world were to take off at once. That would be terrifying. Oh. Huh. Yeah, I guess it would be.